Welcome to a quiet night. Lie down, relax your body, close your eyes if you wish, and simply listen to a story that began more than 100 years ago. They forged the strongest steel, created medicine that saved humanity, and built weapons that spread war across Europe. But it was they themselves, mighty Germany, who led their own empire to ruin. Why would an empire so admired become a symbol of tragedy? Together, we'll uncover the answers, piece by piece, on this journey. Imagine yourself standing in the heart of Berlin in 1910. Train whistles echo through the air, iron wheels grinding against gleaming rails. Electric lights illuminate the night sky. In the factories, workers in striped uniforms hustle beside machines that never stop running. On the cobblestone streets, Carl Benz's automobiles glide smoothly, a technology that, just a few years earlier, was nothing short of a marvel. Germany at the beginning of the 20th century, an industrial fairy tale in the heart of Europe. Names like Siemens, Bayer, BSF, AEG, and Krupp, each one an industrial empire, not only dominating the old continent but also expanding worldwide. At that time, young Germany had been unified for just over 40 years, yet its growth rate amazed the entire world. In steel, it overtook Britain. In chemicals, it dominated the globe. In technology, it was masterful. In military power, Germany possessed one of the most skilled and modern armies in the world. But behind the brilliant industrial glory, a thick shadow was gradually forming. It was unresolved internal conflicts. It was an ever-growing ambition for hegemony. It was recklessness in diplomacy and dangerous gambles on the European chessboard. And in the end, that very ambition would pull Germany from the heights of glory straight down into the abyss of war, death, and collapse. The story we are about to explore is not merely history, but a lesson about the danger when a young power moves too fast, too far, forgetting its limits. This is the story of the German Empire before World War I, from industrial glory to historical disaster. When studying the German Empire during this period, I see not only a nation striving to rise, but also a fierce internal struggle within the very soul of the German people, between ideals and ambition, between pride and insecurity, between modern technology and old feudal thinking. What is astonishing is that all these industrial achievements happened in less than 40 years since Germany's unification. But perhaps it was this rapid development itself that became a double-edged sword. So how was Germany unified? Who laid the first stone for this powerful empire? It all began with a cunning man, Otto von Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor of Europe. Let us step into the next chapter of this journey. Before 1871, Germany did not exist on the world map as a unified nation. Instead, it was a fragmented mosaic of more than 300 small states, principalities, and kingdoms, from ancient city-states like Hamburg and Bremen to powerful dynasties like Bavaria, Saxony, and Prussia. They all spoke German. They shared a common German culture. But they were independent political entities, even competing with one another. After Napoleon's defeat, the Congress of Vienna in 1815 established the German Confederation, Deutscher Bund, a loose alliance presided over by Austria. But the ambition to unify Germany never faded in the hearts of many Germans. The question was, who would unify Germany? Would it be Austria, conservative with its feudal legacy, or Prussia, the rising military power in the north, with an extremely efficient administrative system? And then, history chose Otto von Bismarck, an East Prussian nobleman, the man whom the world would later call the Iron Chancellor. Bismarck was a master of power, diplomacy, and strategy. He understood better than anyone that Germany could only be unified through iron and blood, through calculated wars, not through romantic speeches about national spirit. At that time, most Germans longed for unification, but they disagreed on how to achieve it. Some believed in constitutions, in elections, in voluntary alliances. Bismarck, on the other hand, believed that Germany's fate lay in the barrel of a gun, in blood and tears. To unify Germany, Bismarck orchestrated 3 consecutive wars, each one carefully calculated like a diplomatic chess game. The objective, to gain control over the disputed duchies of Schleswig and Holstein. A temporary alliance with Austria defeated Denmark. This was a test move both to assess Prussia's military strength and to create grounds for division with Austria. Bismarck deliberately provoked Austria. The Battle of Königgrätz ended swiftly with Austria's crushing defeat. Bismarck wisely avoided humiliating Austria, preventing long-term hostility. The North German Confederation, Norddeutscher Bund, was established under complete Prussian control. The decisive war. Bismarck manipulated the Ems dispatch to provoke Napoleon III of France into declaring war. Prussia and the southern German states united. After a series of victories, German forces besieged Paris and captured the entire French army at Sedan. The French Empire collapsed. On January 18, 1871, in the Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles, the symbolic heart of France, King Wilhelm I of Prussia was officially proclaimed the first emperor of the German Empire, Kaiserreich. The German Empire was born, a young, powerful, and ambitious great power. In terms of diplomatic skill, Bismarck was almost in a league of his own. He isolated each opponent, struck quickly and decisively, and always left a way out for the defeated to avoid long-lasting resentment. But unfortunately, his successors lacked that very sense of caution and foresight. Although unified politically, the German Empire remained a fragmented federation in terms of culture, religion, and power. Prussia controlled the military, foreign affairs, and central finances. But states like Bavaria, Württemberg, and Saxony retained their own armies, education systems, and independent local governments. Religious divisions were also deeply rooted. The North was Protestant, the South was Catholic. Within the empire were still minority groups such as Poles and Jews. Bismarck was well aware of these sources of instability, but in his view, as long as Germany was strong militarily and economically, internal unrest could be kept under control. In theory, the empire had a parliament. In reality, the Kaiser held absolute power. The chancellor was appointed by the Kaiser. The military answered only to the Kaiser. The Junker class, East Prussian landowners, controlled the administrative, military, and diplomatic apparatus. For the next 20 years, Bismarck maintained a fragile balance of power. He suppressed the socialist movement, restricted Catholic influence, and kept minority ethnic groups in check. Yet, at the same time, he was the first to introduce health insurance and pension policies, laying the foundation for the modern welfare state. Here, Bismarck appears not only as a tough politician, but also as a cold-blooded pragmatist. For him, every policy served one ultimate goal: preserving the fragile unity of the German Empire. But precisely because everything depended so heavily on him, when Bismarck stepped down, Germany quickly wavered under the inexperienced hands of his successors. When Bismarck was forced to leave the stage of power in 1890, German history entered a completely new chapter. More dangerous, more reckless. A young man, deeply insecure yet fiercely ambitious, ascended the throne, Wilhelm II, and from this point on, the German Empire began its long downward slide. In 1871, the German Empire was born with a unified army, a booming economy, and the seasoned Iron Chancellor, Bismarck. But beneath that strong exterior was a fragmented federation, like a complex clockwork with hundreds of gears turning out of sync. Each region carried its own distinct identity. Bavaria took pride in its Catholic culture and royal traditions. Saxony retained its own education system. Württemberg had an independent army. City-states like Hamburg and Bremen still operated as old commercial republics. The German Empire was divided by religion. The North, Prussian territory, was Protestant, associated with discipline, rationality, and military strength. The South, especially Bavaria and the Rhineland, was a Catholic stronghold where the Roman Church still held deep influence over political and cultural life. Bismarck, a Protestant Prussian, saw the Catholic Church as a force opposing the central state. He launched the Kulturkampf, the cultural struggle, to reduce the Church's influence. Catholic clergy were placed under surveillance. Catholic schools were brought under state control. Several bishops were even expelled. But the campaign failed. Instead of dividing them, it united the Catholics, leading to the formation of the Center Party, Zentrum, a powerful opposition force in the Reichstag. The failure of Kulturkampf was a profound lesson for any government. Administrative measures cannot extinguish religious faith. Bismarck was a political mastermind, but this time he underestimated the unifying strength of the German Catholic community. Beyond religious conflict, German society was also torn by increasingly deep class divisions. The Junkers, the East Prussian landed aristocracy, owned vast estates, controlled politics, the military, and foreign affairs, conservative and staunchly opposed to any democratic reforms. The emerging industrial bourgeoisie controlled major industrial conglomerates in chemicals, electricity, and steel, wealthy but lacking significant political power, eager to expand their influence through parliamentary reforms and legislation. The working class, labored in factories under poor conditions with low wages and no insurance, became the backbone of the socialist movement. Many supported the Social Democratic Party of Germany, SPD, believing in collective rights and social reform. In 1878, after 2 failed assassination attempts on Wilhelm I, Bismarck seized the opportunity to pass anti-socialist laws. All workers' organizations were banned. SPD property was confiscated. Police were granted authority to arrest without cause, but instead of weakening the movement, it only made the SPD stronger. Speeches by August Bebel and Wilhelm Liebknecht continued to be printed illegally and circulated underground. Elections showed the SPD gaining an increasing number of seats in the Reichstag. Strangely enough, the more it was suppressed, the stronger the SPD became. This revealed one clear truth. If a government chooses only to speak to the working class with an iron fist, it will soon push them toward extremism. The German Empire was home to millions who were not ethnic Germans. Poles in eastern Germany, Posen, Silesia, Danes in Schleswig, Jews scattered across major urban centers. Although they held German citizenship, they were often viewed with suspicion and faced discrimination. They were restricted from joining the military or civil service. Schools were required to teach in German, with minority languages banned. Germanization campaigns took place across the empire. For the Jews, latent anti-Semitism, which would later form the basis for the brutal policies of the Nazi era, began during this time. They were seen as never truly pure, stereotyped as bankers, manipulators. Jan Kowalski, a Polish carpenter in Posen, was forbidden from teaching his children their native language. His family was forced to speak German in public. His son, though born in Germany, was denied entry into the army for lacking loyalty to the Kaiser. This was not just personal prejudice, it was state policy, a forced assimilation. These overlapping tensions made Germany resemble a pressure vessel. On the outside, a steel shell, the military, industry, and administrative system. But inside, a society full of fractures, where even a minor geopolitical shock could cause the entire system to explode. Yet, despite the instability, one thing was undeniable. Germany was industrializing at an unprecedented pace. A new great power had emerged, and it was this very industry that would serve as Germany's launchpad to greatness, but also its Achilles heel, dragging it into war. In the heart of old Europe, a giant was rising. It was powerful, precise, disciplined, a machine called the German Empire. In less than 40 years after unification, Germany had surpassed most of the aging great powers to become a European leader in industrial production, science and technology, and finance. Steel was the lifeblood of the Industrial Revolution, and in Germany it flowed from the furnaces of Krupp, the greatest steel empire in Europe. Krupp produced not only railway tracks and industrial machinery, but also cannons, shells, and the most advanced military equipment of the time. By 1910, Germany was producing over 13 million tons of steel annually, far surpassing Britain and second only to the United States. With steel, Germany built not just factories, railways, and harbors, but power itself. In the laboratories, Germany was launching another revolution. Silent, smokeless, the chemical industry. Bayer invented the painkiller aspirin, the first pharmaceutical product to be commercialized globally. BASF developed chemical fertilizers and synthetic dyes. Germany's textile dye industry quickly dominated the global market. By the early 20th century, Germany controlled over 80% of the world's industrial dye market. It wasn't just about medicine and color. This was soft power, Germany's way of invading the world through intellect and chemistry. While candlelight still flickered in many European cities, Berlin was already glowing with electric light. Siemens not only supplied electrical equipment, but also built entire power transmission systems for many European cities. Electric trams, elevators, telegraph networks all bore the fingerprints of German engineering. AEG pioneered the integration of electricity into everyday life, propelling Germany into the age of modern energy. If there was one invention that defined the 20th century, it was the automobile, and the man who created it was a German. In 1885, Carl Benz built the first gasoline-powered automobile. In 1888, his wife, Bertha Benz, drove the car 106 kilometers to demonstrate its practicality. That journey became the first automobile trip in history, marking the beginning of a revolutionary industry. Later, the Mercedes-Benz brand would become a symbol of German quality and of a nation that turned engineering into art. In medical laboratories, Germany continued to make groundbreaking advances. Beyond aspirin, German companies pioneered the isolation of antibiotics, vaccines, and antiseptics. Medical schools, such as those in Berlin and Heidelberg, became world-leading centers for training doctors. While other nations still relied on folk remedies, Germany had already turned medicine into an industry. Without finance, there is no industry, and Germany understood that better than anyone. Deutsche Bank provided capital for massive projects, power plants, metallurgical factories, roads, bridges, ships. The largest project, the Berlin-Baghdad Railway, a geopolitical link driven by the ambition to control trade routes from Europe to the Middle East. This wasn't just about money. It was a long-term strategy to compete with Britain on a global scale. One of the lesser-known keys to Germany's success, education. The German university system emphasized applied research, engineering, chemistry, medicine, and industry. The link between universities and businesses was extremely close. Technological inventions were often commercialized while still in the academic research phase. The United States later adopted this model to build its technical universities after World War I. Japan came to Germany to study mechanical and military engineering. From there, Germany became the greatest creative engine in Europe. Even as industry boomed, agriculture remained a pillar in many rural areas, especially in East Prussia. The Junker estates produced grain, oats, and potatoes for export across Europe. The Tariff Law of 1879, initiated by Bismarck, created the Alliance of Iron and Rye, a coalition of industrialists and landed aristocrats. This was the power axis that controlled Germany's domestic economic policy for over 3 decades. It was a marriage between industry and feudalism, both modern and traditional. If I had to choose one word to describe Germany at the start of the 20th century, I would choose efficiency. Everything was systematic. Everyone had their place. But it was this very efficiency that made Germany feel like a train speeding forward, with no brakes, no reverse, and no way to control its pace. With all these achievements, Germany became the world's second largest industrial power, just behind the United States. But behind that brilliance, political ambition was also growing, and leading that path was a young, impulsive, and deeply insecure emperor, Wilhelm II. When looking at Germany at the start of the 20th century, one cannot ignore the presence of the military. Not just as a tool of war, but as a pillar of society, a symbol of national spirit, and the power base for the conservative elite. Since unification, the German military had been organized like a precision mechanical engine. Every gear functioned under strict discipline. From strategy and logistics to technology, everything reflected the ambition to make Germany an unbeatable nation. Under the command of Helmuth von Moltke, a military genius, the Germans pioneered the use of railways for troop movements. War became the art of logistics. Every maneuver was calculated like a mathematical diagram. Trains could deliver hundreds of thousands of troops to the border within days, a speed never before seen in European history. At the same time, the Krupp conglomerate supplied the military with cannons weighing dozens of tons, with ranges so great that neighboring countries had to completely rethink their defense systems. Modernization didn't stop at weaponry. Communication systems using telephones, telegraphs, modern printed maps, and even gas masks began to be introduced in peacetime military exercises. The military was also a training ground for future leaders. For middle-class youth, military service was considered a rite of passage. The most outstanding were recruited into the officer corps, an elite class, tough and highly influential in politics. Not content with dominance on land, Wilhelm II, driven by a desire to surpass Britain, ordered a massive naval modernization. Under Admiral Alfred von Tirpitz, Germany built dozens of battleships, some even surpassing the British dreadnoughts in design. This naval arms race was a key factor in Britain's shift from neutrality to alliance with France, its traditional enemy, in order to counter Germany's rise. The German Empire at the dawn of the 20th century resembled a fortress, powerful, proud, but also rigid. And a fortress like that, when faced with strategic missteps, cannot easily turn back. Wilhelm II was a complex figure. Born with a deep sense of insecurity, a congenital deformity left his left arm crippled, he spent his life feeling imperfect for kingship. This drove him to become sensitive, impulsive, and obsessed with demonstrating strength to mask his inner doubts. Unlike his British mother, who believed in liberalism, Wilhelm II believed that a monarch needed to listen to no one, that he was the absolute embodiment of the nation. And when he forced Bismarck to resign in 1890, he erased the legacy of cautious diplomacy that his predecessor had left behind. Wilhelm launched the policy of Weltpolitik, a new doctrine of global ambition, seeking to make Germany a world power equal to, or even greater than, Britain and France. Germany heavily invested in its navy, claimed colonies in Africa, intervened in the Morocco crisis, competed for ports in the Middle East, signed trade treaties in East Asia, and built the Baghdad Railway. To other great powers, Germany was no longer just a European nation. It was a global threat. But Wilhelm's danger didn't lie in his aggressive speeches. It lay in the fact that he had no long-term strategy. His diplomatic actions were often impulsive, uncoordinated, and triggered chain reactions. Germany abandoned its pro-Russian policy, pushing Russia into France's arms. Britain, once France's rival, now formed alliances with both France and Russia, creating the Entente Cordiale. Germany, with only Austria-Hungary as its major ally, became increasingly isolated. Wilhelm II may have been a gifted orator, but he didn't know how to listen. On a global chessboard, that is not a strength. It is a danger. The collapse of the alliance system Bismarck once built left Europe in a state of suspicion, where every power bloc stood poised to strike. The Morocco crises of 1905 and 1911, where Germany challenged French influence in North Africa, pushed France and Britain closer together. The Balkan crises of 1912 to 1913, when small nations like Serbia, Montenegro, and Greece rose up against Austria-Hungary, forced Germany to choose sides. And it did, backing Austria-Hungary at all costs. Meanwhile, Chief of the General Staff Alfred von Schlieffen devised an enormous military plan. If war broke out, Germany would strike France first by invading through Belgium, bypassing French defenses and capturing Paris within 6 weeks before turning east to fight Russia, which would take longer to mobilize. It was the largest two-front military strategy ever conceived. But it relied entirely on one condition: absolute speed. And when 1914 arrived, the disaster began. On June 28th in Sarajevo, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary was assassinated. Austria issued an ultimatum to Serbia. Russia opposed. Germany pledged full support to Austria. France declared its solidarity with Russia. Britain entered the war after Germany violated Belgian neutrality. Within days, all of Europe was engulfed in flames. World War I had officially begun. 4 years later, millions were dead, millions more wounded, and Europe's economy lay in ruins. Germany, the nation that had entered the war with pride, was exhausted. The Schlieffen Plan had failed. The Western Front became mired in trench warfare. The army was depleted, the people revolted, and on November 9, 1918, Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated. The German Empire collapsed. But the real takeaway was the lesson. Germany had risen to global power through industry, technology, education, and organization, only to lose everything because of unchecked ambition, reckless leadership, and a failure to understand the limits of power. The story of early 20th century Germany is a cautionary tale for every rising nation, because strength alone is not righteousness, and speed does not guarantee arrival. Today, as we look back, we may admire Germany's achievements in science, economics, education, and social organization. But we must also shudder at the sight of military might driven by political misjudgment, at a society unable to accommodate its own internal diversity, and above all, at a state that didn't know how to stop until it pushed itself over the edge. So the final question is, could it happen again? In a world that is increasingly polarized, where technology advances faster than wisdom, where nations rise faster than they can be governed, perhaps the lesson of the German Empire is not just a story of the past, but a warning for the present. And that is the story of the German Empire, a nation that rose like an unstoppable machine, only to collapse under the weight of its own speed and ambition. This is not just a history lesson. It is a reminder to every modern nation. Technology, discipline, and industry can take a people far, but without vision, without internal tolerance, and without responsibility for power, collapse becomes only a matter of time. Today, our world is witnessing new races in artificial intelligence, in resources, in space, and in global influence. Are we repeating the path of Germany a century ago, where progress outpaces control? Stay with the channel so we don't just learn history, but also understand ourselves. Don't forget to hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and share your thoughts below. We read every comment. See you in the next video.